Okay, I'll check in again. Maria, can you hear us okay?
We can now.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. All right, then we're going to go ahead and get started. We are at the 7th meeting of the Clark County Climate Change Planning Community Advisory Group. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm Sylvia Chabrowski, helping to facilitate this process. We have a full room here in person, and I know we have several CAG members online, so thanks all for joining. I'll just walk us through our agenda and meeting purpose, and then we can dive in. I'm going to go to the next slide. And this project is funded by Washington Climate Commitment Act. Thank you. Go ahead. Great. So I'll just do a quick welcome. If we go to the next slide, we have a reminder of our project team. And we do have Josh Proudfoot joining us, who I think is online now. Josh did say hello and a few words at a previous meeting, but we didn't formally introduce Josh. And I think we might do that later. Nope, Josh is here. Josh, you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Josh Proudfoot, and I'm the Director of Climate and ESG for Parametrics. I hear your group has been running beautifully, so congratulations on all getting along and expressing all the different opinions. And I look forward to helping out tonight.
Great, thank you, Josh. And we've all met each other many times, so we won't do another round of introductions. Thanks all for being here. All right, let's go to the next slide. And we always like to start with a reminder of the vision of this group. So just a reminder that we are all here to, with the purpose of implementing House Bill 1181 and creating a climate chapter for the comprehensive plan to support Clark County. And really the vision of this group that we all developed together early on was that by 2045, Clark County would have good stewardship, better health equity, green jobs, transformed transportation, energy, and waste systems, and be prepared for uncertainty. Just keep that in mind as we talk through the pieces today. If you go to the next slide. All right, so today we have two key purposes for our meeting. So first is to continue the conversation on greenhouse gas emissions and building that piece of the climate element. So you'll remember at our last meeting, you all got an introduction to greenhouse gas emissions in unincorporated Clark County, kind of where they come from, what are the sources, how many are there, and we learned that buildings, so houses, residences, industry, different types of office buildings are a big part of emission sources in unincorporated Clark County. So today we're going to dive more into that. You'll hear more about how buildings contribute to greenhouse gas emissions and some of the strategies that exist elsewhere to reduce those kinds of emissions. And then we'll have a lot of time for conversation with you all to hear about your ideas and considerations for reducing emissions in different kinds of buildings. And today we're going to structure things a little bit differently for that conversation. We tend to kind of speak all in the large group, but today we're going to have a series of exercises. We're going to have a little writing exercise, and then we're going to break into small groups, and then we're going to come together and do a report out and discussion. So we look forward to kind of mixing it up a little bit today and seeing how that goes. So that'll be most of our agenda. And then the second thing we want to do is to confirm the prioritization framework. So also at our last meeting, you got a little bit of a tip of the iceberg on the criteria that the team is going to use to sort of analyze all of the resilience and greenhouse gas goals, policies, actions. And those were sent out in advance. We got your input, so thank you for that. And so today the team will recap some of what we heard. We'll have time for more conversation and hope to confirm that criteria so the team can move into that analysis. So, big meeting. We always have a big meeting. Have we ever not had a lot on the agenda? No big deal. We got it. All right, next slide.
Sylvia?
Yes.
Nelson Homer just texted me. He's on his way.
Oh,
so he'll be joining us.
Great. Glad to hear that. Okay, perfect. We have one seat left for Nelson. That's perfect. Full house here. All right, so our agenda for how we're going to run through this today is we'll do project updates, and then you see we have really, over an hour and a half for the greenhouse gas emissions reduction conversation, and about a half hour to do the prioritization criteria conversation and confirm that. And one other thing we want to do, time permitting, is revisit the project process. This was brought up by a few of you at the last meeting, maybe even meetings before that, is sort of how is the input of this group folding into the larger process, and especially with council, you know, how does your voice matter, right? And how is that moving forward? We hope to get there. If we don't have time to get to that piece, we might put it on next month's agenda. And then we'll end with public comment and just wrap up the meeting. Next slide. So just reminders for folks that are joined by the webinar and in the room. Today, if you are CAG members, you should be joined as a panelist. We think we got everyone promoted here. And if you're online, we just ask that you stay on mute when not speaking, but then join on video when you can. And we'll talk about some of the, you know, Zoom logistics when we get to the breakout rooms later too. Whenever we are in discussion, if you're in the room, of course, just raise your name card if you want to get in the queue to speak, and if you're online, just press the raise hand button. If you have any technical issues, just email Maria at mverano@kernswest.com. And it's always helpful to say your name and affiliation before speaking, because we can't all see each other between the different room and platforms. And we do have a break today, but just get up, move around, take care of yourself as needed. If you're in the room, there's a delicious spread of food in the back. I don't even know what we have today, but it smells great. And we're in the small room, so remember, the bathrooms are kind of a, you know, jaunt around. You'll find them. And the meeting is being recorded. Okay, next slide. I think this is the last one before we dive in. So just a reminder of our meeting discussion guidelines. You all have been doing a great job of staying on track and really diving into very complex materials. So I really appreciate that and honor kind of your commitment and how well you've been really engaging throughout the meetings and doing your homework, reading in advance. So really appreciate that. And as we have our conversations today, I just want to lift up a few of the meeting guidelines to really just speak with respect. You know, we're all here with different opinions, so kind of trying to engage in different opinions. And also, if you hear something that you don't agree with right away, don't rush to disagree. Kind of think about, you know, what can you ask to better understand that point of view. Stay curious, engage in that dialogue so that we can get lots of points of view on the table and really hear from one another. And I always want to remind folks about the chat etiquette. If you're online and you want to send a chat message, chat to everyone so that everyone can see it and it becomes part of the public. And next slide. Okay, we did send out CAG meeting number 6 meeting summary with your packet last time, so hopefully there were no edits on that. If they were, we always ask that you provide those in advance. Okay, next slide. All right, now we get into project updates. So I will hand it over to Jenna for some quick updates.
All right, hi everyone. This is Jenna speaking, so if you're online. For those of you in the room, I did print a lot again because we are in this smaller room with a smaller screen. So I guess figure out the best situation for you, whether it's looking at the TV screen, the iPad, or the packet of materials in front of you. We know it's a little bit not our ideal setup, but there is a copy of all of the slides at the back of your packet if you do want to follow along with the slides. Let's see. We still to be determined if we'll be in here or the larger room back in September. Construction started today, so we'll see how it goes, but we'll let you know before the next meeting. Also, in your meeting materials that we sent the link to you all, had comments from other CAG members since the last meeting, as well as public comments that have come through. So those are there for you to review as you like. And then also in your meeting packet, we had a few items in our background information section that we wanted to just make sure we were closing the loop with you all on. So in there, you'll find a copy of the draft resilience policy list that now reflects the last 2 meetings and all the decisions that you made. So that's there online if you want to reference it, and what the consultants are going to be working off of moving forward. And there was also a question at the last meeting around global warming potential. So again, we put a link there to that additional information just to circle back on that item that has come up. So that's there for reference for you if you want, but no need to look at it in detail otherwise. I also wanted to mention, you all may have seen, we had 2 surveys open to the public over the last few weeks. You probably got an email about it, because you're on our list. One was related to potential resilience goals, and the other was collecting some initial feedback around greenhouse gas reduction priorities. So we just closed the surveys yesterday, so we're going to begin to compile the information. Once we do that, it will eventually make its way back to you all to take a look at to see what other people in the public are saying. And then my one other thing, I just wanted to share the reminder to please not reply all to any of our emails. We know it's hard and it's very easy to do it by accident, but just because of the Open Public Meetings Act, we request that you just you can just reply to myself or Nicole, whoever's there, just reply to us, but don't copy anybody else. That is all I have, unless there are any questions.
Great, thank you. Okay, so next we're going to dive into the greenhouse gas reduction actions conversation for today. And so first we'll have Tracy and Josh Proudfoot give some context and sort of explain this process for developing the greenhouse gas emissions reduction actions, and a little bit more context for emissions from buildings in unincorporated Clark County. And then we will kind of do those 3 exercises I described before, which is using a worksheet, which if you want to look at that while they're going through their presentations, you can, just so you have a sense of what we'll be asking you to do later. But it will make more sense once we get there. But this is the worksheet I'm talking about. So later on, we're going to be asking for kind of your input on reducing emissions from buildings, really thinking about the different perspectives of if you're a renter, if you own the building, if you're a developer, right? You're kind of coming from a different angle for buildings. So we'll use that later, and then we'll get into small groups to discuss, and then we'll report out. But we'll explain more how that all is going to run a little bit later. So I'll hand it over to
Sylvia. I got a quick question about the emissions numbers for rural and urban. What are the population figures for Clark County for rural and urban?
70,000 for rural and 170,000 for urban.
Thank you. I was gonna have to look to find it, but looks like you beat me to it. And all of that information is detailed in the full greenhouse gas inventory report too, so you can dig into all of that. Thank you, Sylvia. We can go ahead and go on to the next slide. And you do have that worksheet there, but it'll make a lot more sense once we go through all of these slides. So I'd encourage you not to get too distracted. And for those of you online, don't worry, we have an online version for you too. So we'll get that to you when you need it. But starting off, I just wanted to remind everyone that the charge for this portion of the climate element is to identify greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And so remember that greenhouse gas emissions reductions are taking action to reduce or eliminate the emissions of greenhouse gases in order to reduce the rate and extent of climate change damage. So as just a refresher of why we're here, we spent a lot of time at the beginning of this project talking about climate hazards and resiliency, and those are all of the effects of the greenhouse gas emissions that are in the atmosphere. And so we can address how to adapt to those to the changes that we're seeing, but it's also important to make sure that we're addressing the reason that those changes are happening, which is the greenhouse gas emissions, and that's what we are here to talk about today. And then just the state goal is net zero emissions by 2050. And of course, that is in alignment with best science available. So let's move on to the next slide. Just also,
Actually, while you're getting there, we just got a comment that there's some background noise in the room. I know this is a really difficult room for us all, but I don't know that we can mute individual mics, so maybe just try to not shuffle papers right by the mics if you're next to one, or try to keep background noise.
And
Okay.
whoever's
And
playing whoever's playing the tuba, if you could keep that down a little bit, that'd be great too.
great.
I was snoring.
Okay.
Conditions.
So just to remind you all of the planning process, the first part was that greenhouse gas inventory. Please feel free to dig into the details there. You have that available in your materials and also on the project website. Now we are in the second step, which is identifying actions. And this group's role will be to identify considerations for shaping those actions, which we will get to later today. We will, and then eventually we will evaluate those, prioritize them using the prioritization criteria, and then perform full analysis on the prioritized actions. So this is where we are in the stage, or in the process. Next slide. Because things are going just a little bit differently than for the resilience piece, I just want to make sure that you know how your feedback will be used for this portion. Your feedback will help provide context for the potential emissions reductions actions that are considered for Clark County, and will also provide considerations for the analysis that my team does on the potential emissions reductions actions, and then also context for integration into the comprehensive plan. And so we expect that we're going to get all sorts of comments from you, and they will fall into one of these categories, right? So they will either help us contextualize, fine-tune those actions to make sure that they are relevant to Clark County, or potentially we could hear something from you that'll say, okay, we need to make sure when we're doing our analysis that we address this question or concern that's coming up from the advisory group. And there may be other things that we determine are relevant further down the road in the implementation process. So we'll just want to memorialize that in the comments that go into the comprehensive. So you'll see your comments will be addressed in a variety of different ways, and we will plug them in as they're relevant to the process, and just make sure that we're hearing what you're saying and bringing it in and carrying it through the process. So with that kind of context out of the way, I'd like to get started with an overview on the buildings and energy sector. Next slide, please. And we are going to, Josh and I are just going to give you some general context to help shape this conversation or give you a foundation for this conversation. We'll talk about some best practices for emissions reduction in this sector, and then some other context that will help focus on the emission sources, the highest emission sources and the best practices to guide our conversation that we'll have later with that worksheet. So moving along, let's get right into the buildings and energy sector. When we're talking about the buildings, these are the types of buildings that we're talking about. Generally, they'll fall in the residential or in institutional sectors. And residential, so these are kind of some lumpy categories so that we can kind of identify the sorts of buildings that we're talking about. And of course, there are more than these and much more variety if you dig down deeper, but just to give you an idea. We're in residential, we're talking about manufactured and mobile homes. Those are basically the difference between manufactured and mobile is when it was made, what you would call it. So you might hear us say manufactured or mobile, but we're referring to the same category of housing. Single household detached, this would be your typical, single-family house that stands alone and, isn't attached to anything. Single household attached, this is townhouses, duplexes, multiplexes, up to about 4. So, with attached walls is the main, category here. Multifamily, which are larger, apartment style complexes or condos that would have, 5 or more units. And then also mixed use, which integrates both multifamily housing and commercial use.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
On your first, your manufactured and mobile, a lot of manufacturers of homes, considered manufactured homes are super good sense, way more energy efficient. So before 1966, so how can they be in this?
Just as you're thinking, not, there are differences. There are lots of differences in these categories. We just want to help you think about what types of housing are out there. So this doesn't really mean anything, this categorization. It's just to help you help your thinking start and think about what types of housing we're talking about because if I were just to say residential housing, you might think about where you live and not necessarily where other people live too. Yeah. And these are just categories that that Clark County uses in its planning, and so we've just used consistent terminology. And the question there was for the online folks why we group together manufactured and mobile, since they can have significant energy profile differences. Okay, so in the institutional side, we're going to see buildings like schools, food establishments like restaurants and grocery stores, commercial and office space where you might have a lot of people working at desks, for example, buildings like warehouses where people either store items or where you might have a distribution center, like an Amazon center or some sort of other logistics center, and then manufacturing buildings. So just to give you an idea of kind of the types of buildings that we're talking about.
Clinics, like Vancouver Clinic or hospital go in that?
I would consider that probably in the relative commercial and office. But again, these categories are not necessarily distinctions for what we're doing today, just to jog your memory. So it's good that you're thinking about other sorts of buildings. We could also talk about churches and community centers and things like that. So there are lots of different types of buildings. So we just want to expand your thinking about what types of buildings we're talking about. Okay, so next slide. So we just made a point of saying that there are a lot of different types of buildings, and it's also important to remember that across all of those different types of buildings, the energy uses are relatively few. So we can talk about the primary energy uses that come from all of those different types of buildings, and they might be slightly higher or lower in a different type of building, but we can pull all of them together and know that in general, the primary emission sources are going to come from the use of electricity and generally natural gas. You can have other fuel types like propane and fuel oil, but those are much smaller in Clark County. So we're mainly talking about heating space and cooling space, so ambient heating and air conditioning. Also, water heating is a primary use of energy to create emissions for your water heaters, pools, showers, washing your clothes, all of that. Ventilation, so moving air around in buildings is one of the major sources. Lighting and cooking. And these, like I said, will have a different level of importance at each type of building, but these are the main categories of the ways that we use energy in buildings. And then you have all sorts of other electronics, like all of our computers and our TVs and things too, but they are much lower energy and emission source than these things. So next slide here. So identifying the primary sources of energy use and therefore emissions helps us understand what the best approaches would be to reducing those emission sources, right? So as we reduce the energy use, then the emissions associated with that is also reduced. There are many best practices out there, and there are lots of different ways to do this, but they fall in these kind of categories. Purchasing electricity from renewable sources, electrifying buildings and appliances where possible, like air heating and cooling and water heating, performing energy efficiency audits to identify where energy is being completely wasted, not even used to produce anything, and then addressing those issues. Weatherization, which is improving the envelope of the building, the walls and the windows and the roof, so that energy isn't being wasted. Installing more efficient appliances, looking at on-site generation like rooftop solar, so producing energy on the building rather than just using it. In some cases, planting trees for shade or maintaining trees for shade can be really helpful. I'm sure a lot of us know about that tree in the backyard that we don't want to go anywhere because it keeps that side of the house cool. And then thermostat upgrades too can be really helpful, just to make sure that energy isn't being used, that we're not overheating or overcooling space when it's not needed. Josh, do you want to add anything to these best practices as we move forward?
Just a few comments, thank you. First of all, in residential settings, the air heating, cooling, and the water heating is roughly 70 to 80% of the emissions. And that just helps put things in context, because there are a bunch of things we can do in our homes that reduce energy, but we want to just make sure that everybody sees the really big ones, right? And the other thing I'd mention here is when it comes to efficient appliances, the movement on that front is so quick. I don't know if anybody else has noticed, but every time I buy an appliance and I look at that little yellow sticker on it that says how much it's going to use, it's astonishing how much less energy it uses than the one that I had before. So a lot of that progress is made incrementally and is driven by the Department of Energy and EPA. And all appliances are getting more efficient, just categorically. So, and last but not least, when talking about all of these things, there's no implied, and we'll do it all at once. No one has the money to do that. People have systems that work. They work until they don't work. And when they fail, that's a great time to make the switch. So in everybody's head, imagine that not everything's happening at once. It's happening maybe faster than normal, but also at a reasonable time when folks might be able to afford it. No one wants to rip out things that are still working, throw them out, and then put in new ones. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. All right, let's go on to the next one. As we're moving on in this conversation too, we want you to be thinking about Clark County's role in these actions. So there are lots of different things that we can do. Josh was just talking about replacing appliances. Clark County's probably not buying you a new stove. So so that's up to residents, but Clark County could potentially still have a role in something like appliance upgrades, right? So these are some examples from other places where we've done similar work, and you can see that the county would have a different role in supporting that emissions reduction action. So there may be some things that are really an action for the county to take, and they will own it, and it's something that they can that the county can implement In some cases, you might see a supporting role, so lending support either politically or in another way. And then another way might be convening. So even bringing together a group like this to develop solutions further could be a role that the county could take. So we just want you to be thinking about the county can't do everything, and they have you know, some things are managed outside of the county, either in the cities that people live in, which we're talking about unincorporated counties, so less relevant here, but or the state or federal government might have some rules. So one of those areas might be something like building code, right? The state manages that, so the county has limited authority to actually make rule changes, but could maybe support discussing changes with the state. So that would be a different role that the county would play in that case. So just here, just thinking about the different roles that the county can take. Next slide. And then also in that vein, we want to just bring up that since we're talking about things like electricity, in the state of Washington, there is the Clean Energy Transformation Act, which does have strong goals to reduce the carbon intensity of electricity. It doesn't reduce 100, well, it doesn't, we don't expect it to reduce all of the building energy emissions, so there's still work to do. And it's also important to keep in mind that a lot of the climate-related initiatives have some level of uncertainty because there are legal challenges. And so if a challenge were to succeed and eliminate one of these, then we wouldn't be able to count on the reductions that would come from that. So that's always something to keep in mind and make sure that there's also local action to back up in case we can't rely on those reductions from external sources. Next, please. So now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the graphics that we sent to you in the the background information that you got as your prep. And I'll invite Josh to talk a little bit more about these. Josh, do you want to go ahead and
Sure.
Highlight? Yeah.
Sure. So first, I want to bring everybody's attention to that this is a measure of greenhouse gases. It's not a strict measurement of energy, but they're highly correlated. And for that reason, we have the kind of appliances that consume the energy and the source of their emissions. This is also a classic mix of a community that has both natural gas and electricity, and that electricity in this community is actually very low carbon. It's mostly hydro and generated from the Bonneville system. Okay, so a couple of things. First, notice that the single family detached home is the largest single bar. And you see this bar and you see that that's roughly 40,000 homes there. Then go to the apartments 5+ units, almost on the far right, and notice that 20,000 homes is a tiny fraction of the 40,000 homes and nowhere near the half that you would expect. And then if you look at the single family attached, so duplexes, and then these smaller triplexes and quadplexes, you'll see that they're dramatically more efficient too. Not as inefficient as an apartment, but anytime you start sharing walls, you tend to have big energy savings. Also, square footage shows up in here. There's less home, so there's less energy needed, therefore there's less greenhouse gases. And then look at this mobile homes one, where 2,500 households has almost the same footprint as 20,000 apartment buildings, right? It's really astonishing. And that's because we know mobile homes and RVs typically are not well insulated and bleed a whole lot of energy. You'll also notice these big bars from space heating and water heating. And then kind of everything else is stacked in there. We have emissions on the left, but I think the size of the bar is really telling the story. Any questions on this graph?
Yeah, let's do our name tag. So let's go to Noel, and then Dawn, and then Nick, and then Bill.
So going back to our list of, we had the manufactured home and then the mobile home being a distinction. And on this graph, we're only talking about mobile homes. So are we only talking about the pre-1976?
When you see these graphics, so this is data that we're pulling from another community. So just to give you, something that we would expect to see consistent with the scale of energy use. So you're not looking at the exact number of anything here. This is just an example of the scale of energy use. And then in this case, in this community, they didn't have the distinction between manufactured and mobile homes like Clark County does. So when you see mobile homes here, just consider that it's a group of manufactured mobile and RV homes.
Dawn?
This is Don Steinke, Climate Action of Southwest Washington. My question may have been partly answered already by Tracy, but looking at the chart, I live in an all-electric home. I've had a heat pump ever since 1965. I have no fossil fuel consumption. My house is not available for much of Clark County. And so how would you ascribe my emissions? Were you basing it on Eugene or Bend or Clark County, Clark PUD profile? Can you talk about that a little bit?
It would basically be the greenhouse gases that are emitted in the production of electricity that you consume in your home. So it's not something that you would see a smokestack on your house or even a small vent stack. It would be where the power is generated. So, so that would be usually from combustion sources like natural gas or from coal or from biomass energy. There's some debate about biomass, whether that's carbon neutral or not, but that's for another time. So your single family, if you were on all renewable power and you had no combustion sources, would be near zero.
Thank you.
Nick, and then Justin, and Andrea, I also see your hand online. Thanks. Go ahead, Nick.
Okay, what concerns me here is these are estimates. And we are still going to are going to try to set goals on emission reduction for Clark County. But yet we're told this isn't even Clark County. It's a representative from another part of somewhere. So where is this information coming from? Is this a community in Bend, or is it a community in Nome, Alaska, or what are we comparing this to? I don't have any idea what the data is saying, if what I've just been told, but I have no comprehension of this.
Yeah, we brought this image forward because we thought it was really insightful, and after doing this work in many communities, we've seen the similar patterns. So the exact number of homes, the exact number of emissions is not, we didn't have the scope to do this here in Clark County. So we brought you information that we've seen be consistent across the various communities that we've done this work in the Pacific Northwest. So I would expect to see, even though we haven't been able to do this exact work in Clark County, we would expect, based on your greenhouse gas emissions inventory that we did do and the data that we've seen from other communities, that you would see something fairly similar to what we're showing you here.
Jenna, why didn't we have the money to do this in Clark County?
This study itself was a couple $100,000, and so, you know, there are constraints. I mean, Jenna, I don't want to speak for you, but
yeah, I mean,
We didn't have an extra couple $100,000.
Right, like we have a grant from the Department of Commerce for only so much and, you know, had to decide what to scope into it. So I think, so to get to your point, Nick, on the, you know, we're gonna have to set specific numbers. We are going to do some modeling later on in the process specific to Clark County and the impact we think it can have. But we're gonna wait to do that until we have a more refined list of things we want to see the impact they're gonna have. So at this point, we're looking for sort of the general, like, we generally know, as Josh was saying, right? If homes are sharing walls, that uses less energy than if homes aren't sharing walls. So we're looking for the patterns here. So, but yes, your point is taken. These numbers are not for Clark County, but the general patterns, any community in the Northwest is going to have this.
But the
general.
Northwest has a lot of different connotations. I mean, is it in the same climate as ours?
I believe
This is the city of Eugene, so I wouldn't expect that to be drastically different.
Yeah.
And I would also mention that Eugene has very clean electricity, probably cleaner than Clark County PUD on average. So the numbers, the bars would be relatively higher in Clark County. But again, it's the relative portions that we're trying to show. And we should take that next question, and then the next slide also illustrates a little bit more on this topic.
Okay, thanks, Josh. Yeah, let's go to Justin and then Andrea.
I just had three things. Josh may be able to answer some of these. So in this figure from the city of Eugene, are they accounting for the greenhouse gas emissions emitted during construction and development? I just see end use and housing types, so it's not. Okay.
Operations.
Okay, good. Just want to clarify that. It would be great to see some figures if the data is out there adjusted for number of people. In general, generally more people live in single-family detached compared to other dwelling units, and how we can adjust for energy use based on that. That'd be great to see, like per capita, however that happens. And then also the age of construction. So when was the structure built? So Washington State Energy Code is one of the most aggressive, if not the most aggressive in the nation. And then also in larger multifamily projects now, it requires full electrification. So maybe seeing again, kind of like number of people in the dwelling unit, and then maybe some more data on emissions based on when the structure was initially built. So those are my comments.
And I just say that pre-1990 is where you see the big difference in energy consumption. And we have, you know, depending on developments, you'll find weird anomalies. Like there are whole neighborhoods in Eugene where it was mostly ceiling heat, right? And electrical resistant ceiling heat. It's just crazy. It's hard to imagine. But there's two other things I want to mention here. One is that when we looked at permit data from the last 5 years in Eugene, there was very little gas in any building over 4 units. So most multifamily buildings had gas for a pool and an entryway, and then all the units were electric. And we're talking consistent over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of permits each year. So that was kind of a surprise. And I asked a developer friend about that. And he said, oh yeah, in the apartment buildings, you're trying to simplify everything. You don't want that complexity. But I understand we have some developers and it depends on what they develop. The other thing I'd mention is that when you think of low income and exposure, this far right column is where a lot of that exposure to heat and cold temperatures is, and big bills, but also in the single family dwellings, like in Portland, the GHGs or air toxics, associated with wood smoke are all coming from single family detached homes that have been owned across generations that are in a poor state of repair. So when you look for the equity challenges related to GHGs, not energy burden specifically. You got to look in single family, multi-generational households, and these mobile homes, manufactured homes, RVs. There's one more question we had.
Yeah, one more question, and then I'll try to move us along, because I think we have several more slides and want to have plenty of time for discussion. So Andrea, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question, but I'm going to yield my time just because Justin had asked it and it was answered. Thanks.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, let's keep moving along.
Next slide.
Okay, so again, this is in GHGs, not in energy intensity, but they're highly correlated. So when you look at the dark green bars, that is greenhouse gases per year. And when you look at the light green bars, that's greenhouse gases per 1,000 square feet. And here's where you see that pre-1990 effect most dramatically in what is called mobile homes here, but also includes manufactured homes and RVs. And you'll also notice that while that intensity is nearly double, the square footage is much smaller. And often in the Pacific Northwest, the winters are so wet and those dwellings are so wet that you're running humidifiers continuously. But then when you start looking at the other number of dwellings, you start really seeing the square footage differences. And this is going to vary by community and by era of when these structures were built. But you start seeing that the energy challenges and the greenhouse gas challenges are really in the thin-walled, older, portable homes and the single-family homes that don't share those walls and have more square footage. Okay, I'll pause right here.
I'll see, I think, Nick, did you have a question on this one?
I need some explanation of what he's talking about. I am totally and completely lost about what he's trying to compare with. I mean, he makes it clear that he knows what he's talking about. I absolutely have no.
Okay, did you understand the previous slide? Is it this side that's confusing?
Everything parametrics has sent me has been confusing, sir.
Okay, perhaps we could set up a separate time to answer questions for you one by one. This information right here, I will take another attempt at. Should I take another attempt at explaining this?
Well, you made a comment about we're using greenhouse gases and we're not using this, but they correlate. Well, what are we correlating between two things?
Electrical consumption.
Or
And
gas
Greenhouse
consumption.
gas emissions and electrical consumption.
Oh, and so how are we supposed to know this if we're lazy?
Well, he said they're correlated, but they're not exactly the same.
So
the more electricity you use, the more emissions.
Or the more gas you burn on site, or the more propane you burn on site, or the more fuel oil you burn on site. So
Yeah, I think
So Nick, I would just encourage having another conversation offline to get more of the questions answered. That would be helpful.
I know you and I had a conversation earlier, and I am just very disappointed in the way this whole thing's going.
Yeah, I hear that, Nick.
I think I think this is not fair to the taxpayers in Clark County that we're using Eugene as a complex here. We got sent out information that we didn't understand last week. I went through that to you, and this whole slideshow, as far as I'm concerned, is going the same way. I think Clark County is better than this. I think we need to stop now and either look at the replacing parametrics with somebody that can explain this to us, or they go back to the drawing board and explain this to people so we can understand it.
I'd like to hear from other members if this information is so confusing that it would be hard to engage in a conversation on greenhouse gas emissions. I think it would just be helpful to hear if everyone's having that same experience as well. Yeah, go ahead, and maybe quick responses so that we can get to a conversation if we can.
The main question that you started with, Nick, was the correlation between the energy burden, energy used, and the emissions associated. So there's a direct correlation. The more energy you use, less it's renewable. The more energy you use, the more emissions you create. That's all there is to it. Now, there's another category called non-emitting resources, and that's nuclear. So you're usually using renewable like solar or hydro, or nuclear, which is another category by itself. But basically, the energy, your intensity of energy use is correlated with how much emissions you're responsible for.
I think so. And go ahead.
Monica Zazweta. Brett, the way you described it, it made sense to me. I was a little confused, and then when you said what you did, I was like, oh, okay, and then more went on explaining to me. That's why I come to these meetings, so I can understand more. And so I just feel staying with the group would be really helpful, because your input is helpful, and we don't want everyone at the table. So I just hope you stay.
Sharon?
I don't know, for myself, I think the parametrics is doing a fine job. I'm not having any difficulty understanding, following the slides or anything else. If I do, just ask a question. But no, I'm not having any issues.
Justin?
I don't have any issues with the process. I think my comments would be, when we're looking at different data and studies, it's always great to have a primary source. So I would have loved to go in and have a link that goes to the City of Eugene study, just so I can understand the study methodology. There's also been previous meetings where we haven't really been provided definitions for terms. So just things like that, where if we're going to provide informed input, we kind of need to know where the information is coming from. And it is a lot of information, but I do appreciate how it is being presented.
Thank you. And I do also want to note, Nelson, you weighed in online that you also think the information needs to be easily understood by the entire CAG, and an offline conversation might not, like, everyone needs to understand this, so thanks, Nelson. Go ahead.
Real quick, Monica, that's what that, just said about definitions, or even saying, to us, did everyone understand that slide? Did everyone understand the words, or what words did you not understand? And, be, okay with, saying, no, I didn't understand that, please explain more. And then other conversations, like the man was saying, that you, like, having a one-on-one conversation so you can understand it more. Because, like I said before, we need everyone at the table.
I think the point that when we go to put together some gas reductions, maybe we can focus more on some for in the sector for single-family homes. Gas is produced as compared to our multi.
Yeah, our intention was to show you some patterns that we've seen in other communities, so that when you're considering, when we're having the discussion about addressing those emissions through emissions reduction actions, that you know where the primary sources of emissions are. And though we don't know the exact, we haven't done this study for Clark County, it is representative, and we do see similar data in the various communities that we see.
And I would just agree that there, like, a few details, extra details would have been helpful, just so that we're all on the same page. But yeah, I think that was the point, so that we can see the pattern.
And I'm not sure who's,
Brett.
maybe Brett, Noel, and then Andrea.
I was
also. But go ahead, Brett.
You can go first.
Okay. I would do, this is probably not exactly on the topic, but I would say that this information would make more sense to me if it was per capita rather than per dwelling unit, because going back to what Nick was saying, as far as a single-family home there could be 8 people living in it, and an apartment there could be 1 person living in it. So I would like to see that representation drilled down to, like, per capita. It would help me make more decisions if I understood really how that correlates. And I'm sure that is not an easy task.
It would,
Well,
it would take a community survey to get there. So in both communities that we've done this, we've gone to the planning department and we have best access to dwelling. But when somebody rents a space or sells a space, they don't know how many people are going to occupy it. And unless we went place by place and said how many people are living here currently now, we couldn't get to that level. I agree, it would be more helpful on a per person basis. But the way that this data is tracked is by household or dwelling.
And another point that I would make to that is that the task at hand is to reduce total greenhouse gas emissions, not emissions per capita. And so while it's interesting, and I would love to, there are lots of things, lots of questions that I have about different reports that we do, and even, you know, in all of the work that we do, I would love to explore different things. You know, we do have to focus on what the charge is here, which is total reduction. So yeah, I would love to be able to study that sort of thing too.
Well, I think if we don't understand what we're dealing with on a per unit, okay, so we're talking per housing unit right now, but if we're not talking per capita in those units, then we're not really, we could be disproportionately addressing the issue towards single family housing when maybe we're off base on that. Maybe it's other types of housing that need to be focused on as well. So I think it is super relevant and super concerning that if we're going off of this data, we may be not addressing where we need to be.
Thank you. And Brent?
Okay, this is Brent Marsden. I'm going to say that I think Nick has made some good points. I think I understand where you're coming from. But I would like to see more information presented in different ways. I mean, here we've got graphs or charts. That's just one way to present information. I like numbers. Now, I know this is done for a visual to show, you know, proportions, but some of us like to see numbers too. But I do think, I'm not going to blame parametrics. I think we have to understand that they've got limitations. They've got severe limitations, and they're trying to do the best we can. So I think what we have to do is we have to work with what we're given, even though it may not truly be satisfactory. So I think, you know, we just have to do the best we can with what we've got.
And Andrea online?
Yeah, Andrea Smith. I guess just to join in on the conversation about utilizing Eugene. Yes, it's true that they have similar climate zones and very similar economic, I guess, indicators, but we have to also understand that in order to get a good picture for Clark County, we have to know, we need to be able to see that information because we're operating on very different sets of regulations and laws in our state versus Oregon. And I think that would impact how some of these structures are built and the energy use of those once they're constructed. So just wanted to point that out, as well as maybe there's a conversation from, like, I don't know, the department or something with the county council to like somehow find some funding to get access to that data, because I think that's really going to help. And then I just wanted to, I guess, make a point as a homeowner and someone who has been homeless in an apartment dweller in the past. It bothers me to see not just Clark County, but other jurisdictions in our area leading us down a path toward apartment only construction. It's not what my generation wants. I'm a millennial. I just turned 30 and got married. So it's very bothersome to me because I don't want to live in an apartment or a missing middle housing type like I do now in a townhouse for the rest of my life. I would like to have land and, you know, beautiful trees and plant a garden. So just wanted to throw that perspective out there for everyone to kind of mull on. Thank you.
And Andrea, I just want to point out, I think that kind of input is really what we're looking for here too, is what is your perspective? How do you want to see Clark County grow, but also in a way that's reducing greenhouse gas emissions? And that comment you just made doesn't rely on data. right? And the data is important, and I'm hearing that people want to see data in all kinds of ways. I'm also hearing there are limitations in what can be studied and what can be brought forward. So I would encourage folks to also just speak from your perspective, even if we don't have perfect data. And I know that's not always the way that you want to have a conversation, but it may be, you know, the kind of work that, and it is the kind of work that this CAG was brought to do, was to speak from your perspective. And I think the team will try to bring as much information to you as possible to help with that conversation as well. And, okay, and I do want to make sure that let's hear from Monica and then Sharon, and then find a path forward for today. Go ahead, Monica.
Thank you. Monica Zazweta. For me, in the past, yeah, owning a home, great, that'd be great. Owning land, great. I need my kiddos and 7 generations from now to be able to thrive on this planet. I need to know that they're gonna be okay after I'm gone and not have to deal with it's already gonna happen, like it's in the process, like we're passing our tipping points on our planetary boundaries. So if that means that I need to scale back, if that means I need to live in a duplex forever, or that means whatever, like if that means I have to like let go of some whatever like comforts or privileges to make sure that life can survive on this planet, then I'm gonna do that. And that's from my perspective, because I know that I don't want my kids to be as stressed and depressed and physically and emotionally drained from this crisis emergency that we're in, this planetary emergency that we're in. So if that means, you know, Monica, duplex is what it has to be, or an apartment is what it has to be so that your kids can be okay, then that for me, that is what has to be okay for me. And there's different type houses, cob houses, 3D printed homes, earth ships. I mean, we have to think outside the box, because thinking the same way over and over again, expecting different results, is insanity, the definition of insanity. And so we have to think and outside the box and have a paradigm shift. I know that's not, you know, the popular thing to say, but I mean, I've stopped wanting to be popular a long time ago. Thank you.
And Sharon?
Yes, mine is just a more general question. With this passage of, is it HB, I forgot the number, maybe this is a question more for Jenna, but many jurisdictions throughout Washington State are doing the same thing that we're doing right now. Is there going to be any sharing of information between the jurisdictions, like, oh, this other jurisdiction had some really good ideas, maybe we could take some of those ideas and incorporate them into ours, or vice versa? Is that coming down the road? Are you all going to do that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. This is Jenna. And my computer just turned off, so I'm not on camera at the moment. But so Clark County, we are in the first wave of jurisdictions who have to implement the law. So the law passed last year, and anyway. So while there's many communities in Washington who've done their own climate action planning already, right? It was not under this legislation, right? So there's places that have done much more than Clark County in terms of climate planning, but never tied to this legislation. So nobody yet has implemented the legislation. We are Department of Commerce is sort of bringing, you know, the counties and cities together who are working on it right now, and we are talking to each other. But anyway, we're sort of, because we're the guinea pigs, we are, you know, that's a disadvantage in terms of having examples of what's already been done. So I guess that's kind of answering the question.
Yeah, that's good information.
So yes, we'll keep talking with other communities, and we have this deadline that we have to meet, so we're challenged by that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So I'll just check with the group. Are you okay continuing to engage in today's conversation, given that you might not get all of the data, and especially not, you know, Clark County specific answers to everything that you want to know today? Are you still okay kind of engaging in a conversation on buildings and energy? Okay. All right, then let's move forward. We're probably gonna have to change our timelines. I'll think about how we're restructuring today's, breakout rooms and stuff while you continue the presentation. But we'll just keep going through the slides, get the information we can, and then dive into discussion. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just
Josh,
say,
I think you have,
yeah, one more thing about this. The point is not, hey, everybody, you got to move into a tiny apartment. The point is, where does the energy get used and where do the GHGs come from? Again, every time I get a new appliance, it's much more efficient, right? We had one participant mention that he's been on an electric heat pump for his house forever, right? On renewable energy, that footprint's zero. Imagine all these single family detached homes on renewable energy with heat pumps and all electric appliances. That footprint would be near zero and you'd still have heating, cooling, hot water, you'd still have a stove, a refrigerator. So it's not really about saying everybody's got to move into an apartment if you're in a house. It's not that at all. It's if you have a house, here's where you intervene. If you live in an apartment, here's where you intervene. If you live in a mobile home, here's where you intervene. But I do want to say that the two places that have the biggest energy consumption and the biggest greenhouse gases in residential are single family detached and these more mobile homes that have thinner walls. Everything else is for us to figure out, right? But it's not a, you have to live this way, you have to adopt somebody's lifestyle. No, it's just, if you're living this way, there are different ways to get at the problem. Okay. Tracy, you want to go to the next slide?
so this is the final contextual slide that we have for you. And this is based on some other work that we've done to show the typical uses of energy in an institutional setting. And so this is across a variety of commercial style buildings. And you can see other is the largest one in this case. That just is miscellaneous, right? So a lot of small sources that are kind of adding up to one large one.
Did you have some examples?
Yeah, so this would be like electronics, like your TVs and screens and things, and
it could also
yeah.
be manufacturing. The equipment in a manufacturing building.
Okay.
Yeah. But the largest single sources that we can identify are listed there on the slide. So ventilation, space heating, lighting, cooling, refrigeration, computing, cooking, water heating, and office equipment. So again, we bring this up to show if you want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, you go to the largest sources of those greenhouse gas emissions and find solutions there, which are, these are the largest single sources. So these should be the first things that we look at when we're looking to reduce emissions. What can we do to reduce emissions in ventilations and computing and lighting, for example? Okay, so I think that is all of our contextual information that we had prepared for you today. And so now I think it's time to talk about the activity.
Yeah. Yes, so we had planned to do a little bit of kind of thinking on your own through a worksheet and then getting into small groups. And I'm wondering if we still try to do all of that?
Yes. Do you want to break now so that we can maybe
Okay,
huddle
let's do that.
and strategize?
That's a great idea.
On your
Okay,
time?
let's take a break, or maybe a little bit of a shorter one, and get back together at 6:50. Does that work? A little 8-minute break? Is that right? Sure. Okay, let's do that. Okay, we are going to restart now, so hopefully folks at home can hear us. All right, we are gonna explain what we're doing and dive in. So we're gonna skip the individual reflection that you see online, but we're still gonna use these worksheets that you have in your packets. And for folks online, I think they won't have their individuals anymore, right? Oh, they still.
Yeah, they'll still have them.
Folks online, you will get a link to an individual worksheet that you can work off of as we have this conversation. So what we're going to do is, Josh, we're going to have you explain kind of what the worksheet is about and the kinds of input that the team is trying to get today. And then instead of having folks start with it individually, we're just going to go straight into small groups and just have the conversation there. But then after the meeting, you're still welcome to add more thoughts to the worksheet, or as we're talking, you can jot them down and then give them back to staff at the end of the meeting.
Do we have a note taker for the online group?
Yes.
Okay.
We have a facilitator for all of the small groups. Josh, I think your note taker is Harrison.
Okay, great, thank you.
So Josh, I'll have you walk through what we're doing here, and folks in the room, if you want to look at the worksheet while he's explaining this, that would be helpful in what we're trying to get out.
Okay, thanks everybody. So if you look at this sheet, there are 4 rows, and each row we're trying to consider from the perspective of somebody that lives in a rental or has a commercial rental, somebody that owns the property and leases it to others, whether that's residential or commercial, folks that live in their own home or do business in their own building, and then those that develop or build the buildings that we live and work in. And there are 3 questions we want to ask ourselves to consider the point of view of those folks. The first one is, what do people need to learn so they can take action on reducing emissions where they live or work? What are the equity considerations? We've heard a bunch of folks talk about affordability and those kinds of things. And then what do you think the county can help with? And again, is it the county's actions? Are they supporting the actions of others, or are they getting everybody together to talk about it? Okay, any questions on that exercise to start? And what we could do is, in those small groups, we just go across the rows rather than the columns, because we'll try and get more complete answers on all of these. Any questions?
And then before questions, just a little bit more context. I also want to say that I think the piece on how can Clark County help, you might not know the answer to that. You might not know what Clark County can do. So we realize that's a question that might be a little bit more difficult to answer, and it's a little bit less important for purposes of today. And so it's okay. We don't get the answer to that one. But for the other ones, you know, all of you have had experience or as one of these types of building owners or whatever. Like maybe you rent, maybe you own your own place, maybe you have your own place and you rent it to someone else. Maybe you own an office building, maybe you work in an office building. So we're kind of trying to get from your perspective, right, and the kinds of buildings that you've been a part of, or what you know about others that engage in different kinds of buildings. You know, what do people need to know to access emissions reductions and the kinds of considerations there. So again, you don't have to know all 4 rows, but a lot of you have some experience in some of them. And sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple more things. So don't spin your wheels on things you don't know about, though. So if you really have no experience as a property manager, it's okay, skip it. but you can participate in the group conversation. And then, we will be collecting the sheets, so please, because that's the best way for us to incorporate your comments. We won't be able to capture everything that, all of your comments that, happen verbally. So, jot down whatever you want us to know, and we'll be collecting these sheets. For those of you online, that's why you have one that has your name on it, so that we know, so that we can collect those and incorporate your comments.
How much time?
So this is,
Just a second, we have a question here from Brent.
this is Brent Marsden. So my question on how can Clark County help, the roles are act, support, and convene, and I think this might have been covered earlier, but could there be clarification on what ACT is? Because to me, these seem pretty bland and tame. I don't see require any place in here. And if somebody's serious about climate change, something needs to be required someplace.
That is a potential action, is to determine a requirement, right? So that's something that,
Okay.
that Clark County could do as an action.
So that's coming under ACT.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, Sharon?
As a jumping off point, would you recommend that we use this sheet in our packet called Best Practices for Emissions Reduction and answering some of these questions?
The stuff on the back.
So the information on the back is a reminder of the things that we covered in the presentation earlier. So, yes, please feel free to refer back to the slides, the information we've presented. It's also here on the back of this page.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, there, on the back of the page, it's sort of an explanation of, a reminder of the different kinds of building types, what the primary emission sources are, and the best practices. So think about all of that. And Nelson, go ahead.
So I think I heard the answer to this, but I just want to make sure that we all understand, from a clarity perspective, we are not to assume that we know the answers to each of the different columns and rows. Just speak from our own experience, correct?
That's correct. Speak from your own experience, right? For clarifying. Right. And we can do a little bit more explanation when we get into our small groups too. And Josh, you asked how much time. So we're gonna go in our small groups until 7:25, and at 7:25, we're gonna come back and do report outs, just a few highlights, a couple of minutes from each group. And Dave Rowe has a question.
For property managers or owner occupants, one thing I think about is window replacement.
That is great, and you're already getting into the discussion, and we're doing that small group. All right, sorry to cut you off, but I want to make sure we have the conversation.
You want to be on the same page here?
Okay, great. So, so folks online, you're going to stay on the Zoom with Josh as your facilitator, and Harrison will be taking notes. And in the room, we are Dawn,
Front of the room, yes.
Noelle and Monica are going with Jenna to a different place.
Yikes.
Come back. No, I feel special, we feel special.
Blink twice if you need help.
And then in this room, we're gonna kind of just split you down. So this half, we've got Jessica, Nick, Sharon, and Justin. I'll take that group. And then Sunrise, Dave, Zelo, and Brent are with Nicole and Tracy. So we can go ahead and split up, and we'll reconvene at 7:25. Josh, you good? We're gonna mute the room. Okay.
Okay. Harrison, are we going to be put into a smaller room?
No, I believe we're going to stay in this larger room,
Oh,
have the discussion
okay.
here online. Yes.
Okay. Okay. I can see, I want to just see if I can see everybody on one screen. I'm not sure if I can. Okay. Terry, I think you're at home. Anne, are you at home?
I am, yes.
Okay, great. So two folks. Anybody else at home?
Me too, Gabriela.
Oh, hi, Gabriella. Okay.
Same.
Anybody beyond that?
Yep, me.
Yep, Nelson is at home.
Andrea and Nelson.
Okay. Sorry, you're split in two different screens, so I am going to try and just make sure I listen for voices here.
Josh, if you drag and drop people's names, you can rearrange them on your screen so they can all be in one.
Oh, that's awesome. Didn't know that. Oh, look it. Okay. That, that
do
is
we
next
just have
level.
to-
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So who else? We've got Gabriella. And I think
So do we get,
Anne.
Josh, yeah,
Okay.
this is Anne, do we get the same view of just those in the room as well?
Do you yeah, so this is what's confusing to me is
Right.
we should go through it. It's me and Harrison and Anne and I think Noel and Terry.
I think Noelle is in a room with somebody physically.
Okay.
There's
Okay.
Gabriella, Andrea,
Yep.
Anne. Okay,
Nelson,
Terry.
and
Nelson.
Terry. Is that right?
Would it be easier if I created a breakout room for all of us?
Yes.
It would be. Thank
Okay.
you.
I am
Thank
so
you.
sorry to do this to everyone, but can everyone slowly tell me who should be in this group? Please use your first name.
Nelson?
All right, Nelson, who's next?
Gabriela.
Thank you.
Terry?
Yeah, all right.
Anne,
And, okay.
Josh.
Right.
Harrison.
Harrison, okay.
And Andrea, I think too.
Yep.
Anyone
Awesome.
else at home? Okay, I'm gonna try to do this. You will get something on your screen that says join breakout room. Click yes, please.
Thank you.
It looks like there's also someone in the chat that's requesting to be in the breakout room as well.
Is there anyone left in this main room that should be in the Zoom room, the breakout room? Alana, if you are able to hear me, there should be something that pops up on your screen that says join breakout room. Yeah.
Oh,
So how come we couldn't be in the breakout room?
I don't
Oh, sorry,
know.
everyone. We're back to here, but remember you can drag and drop the person.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
Um,
I missed your question.
So my question was, and I love that idea and the concept, but I called PUD probably 6 or 8 months ago when I was actually selling the house that I was in for 17 years and asked for just that. And they said they were very apologetic, but they're not doing that any longer.
Well, that's news to me.
And so, well, to the point of this activity that we're involved with would certainly be to reenact that or reinvigorate it or re-implement it because it was such a, we had it done probably 6 years ago or 8 years ago. And it was very, very comprehensive and informative. I learned a lot about the appliances. I learned a lot about heating. I learned a lot about what I was doing wrong. And that kind of one-on-one getting into where you live and seeing your appliances and seeing your environment is really beneficial.
Well, I don't know who you spoke with, but every month we have a group meeting with the entire conservation team, and they're still out there doing stuff. And one of the most recent big findings was a giant water feature that the owner of the home had no idea how much a 2.5 horsepower motor costs him, and it cost him $100 a month.
Yeah. Yeah.
So typically things like thermostats are a big issue if they're not being used properly.
Yeah.
We
Well,
help with all.
it gets to the point though, back to the point of the individual attention, the individual eye on
Right.
where somebody lives. I mean, as opposed to a broad-based, if you've got this, if you got that, if you're doing this, if you're doing that. So having that service accessible, I think, is a really big activity.
I agree, and I think we should say that energy audit can go through for everybody.
Yeah.
Josh, I would agree with that. And speaking for the other utility in this room, Northwest Natural, we also offer energy audits, particularly of any natural gas appliances in a home, whether it's a rental home, whether it's a single family dwelling, whatever. If an individual is a customer of Northwest Naturals, we will provide free annual inspections of all the appliances.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great. Yeah.
Okay, what other things for renters do you think that's discrete from homeowners that we may want to talk about? What are the things that people can travel with when they're renters?
This is Gabriela. I can share that I'm part of the EJC as well as the CAG. So, and some of the questions that I've done for community members, their answer have been their windows leak cold air when when it's cold outside, or the heat when it's hot outside. And also their doors, like if they have like, I don't know if it's pour material in the windows and the doors, but they say they get even water inside their mobile homes or the apartments when it rains too much. So updating those things and their roofs, because they get like a lot of water even through their leaking roofs.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So for equity, I'd say especially in the mobile houses, we've got envelope concerns and for renters, and also maybe even roofs that on a hot day, if they're dark, are going to absorb more heat than if they're lighter. Are there any, if you were a commercial tenant, so let's say you had a restaurant and you wanted to make your business more efficient, but you didn't own the business, what kinds of things would you want to do there?
Again, this is Gabriela, and you shut me up. Oh, quiet. But
Oh, thank you for contributing.
Well, some of the things that because I collaborate with people, business owners along the Fort Plain corridor. So some of the things that they have shared is that they usually have a hard time with the landlord, and it's usually, there's mostly one landlord for most of the commercial buildings in Fort Plain. So usually he doesn't like to fix anything nor upgrade anything. So they have to do it in their own. And so, yeah, even if it's in the outside of the buildings, they have to do it. So the landlord doesn't fix pretty much anything.
And sometimes that could be the term of the lease, and sometimes that could be something where there's negligence there. Is there a role for the county if there's negligence? Okay.
Well, because it seems to me Gabriela's points are all really well taken, but they rest with enforcement from the local jurisdiction.
Right, but so
if the property owner isn't going to take action, then the action needs to be taken by the local jurisdiction, it seems to me. I mean, that's the, it's surprising to me, because I would think that Clark County Code, Gabriela, would include some of these violations that you just listed and the part of rented property, but Clark County, one of the actions that Clark County could take is to increase its level of code enforcers, because I believe there's only 3 that are currently employed by community development. But, so increasing that number and increasing the enforcement of existing code seems to me would increase the availability of the availability of being able to fix some of these things on the part of the renters.
But
And-
I wanna say something. So yes, so increasing the code, but it needs to be enforced for the landowner to do it.
Yeah.
Because
Right. So
That's
there's
a-
two things. Sorry, because I do want to get to other rows, but two things. So there's the health and safety concerns of a renter, right? And then there's energy efficiency and the appliances. And those aren't necessarily the same. They could be the same, but they're not necessarily. So in a commercial lease, there may be nothing there guaranteeing any kind of energy efficiency or equipment, but there might be health and safety standards that need to be abided by, and same in residential. So I think, Gabriella, some of the things you brought up I would think would be in health and safety code that would be about rentals. But in commercial properties, I'm not sure if that same kind of rental standard is there to enforce individual aspects of that contract. So are you speaking, I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it should be by the landlord, so those codes need to be in place. The problem is when the landlord says, well, if you don't like it, get out. So that means if the building needs to be up to code, they leave it up to the renter, the business renter, not the landlord. So that's the
Right.
problem. So that's where the county could probably do something to ensure that the landlord is the one taking care of that.
Okay.
So it's not a burden for the business. Just my
Okay.
2 cents.
No, I think it's great. I just wanted to be clear about which thing you're talking about. And it sounds like the health and safety is the key element here and related to those appliances, because I believe that's enforceable. Let's jump to another line. We've got time for one more of the four. Which perspective do you want to take since we've got renters? We can grab any of these other lines. Anybody have a preference?
What about
Single family?
Owners, so owner occupants?
yeah?
Okay. What kinds of things do you think in those single family dwellings do you think folks would want to learn about? It sounds like the audit is the universal thing. We'll start there. That'll give you your list.
And I just checked with our team, and we still do those energy audits free of charge. So I don't know who you talk to her, but if you give them a call, they'll come out.
Yeah. So
Okay.
publicizing that and making that a louder voice, I think would be important.
And that could be something that the county could support, right? They could share information and do an education campaign with either of the two utilities.
I would
Exactly.
say both of the two utilities. And I also would say that, yes, I agree that support is the right role for the county, because it's the utilities that are offering that service, not the county.
Okay. So for single family homes, what are the things that folks could consider beyond the energy efficiency audit?
Oh,
Well, you
gosh.
mentioned one thing already, color of the paint on the exterior and roofing colors. Both of those have a minimal impact, but they still have an impact.
Insulation in the
Insulation.
buildings and the windows.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's not cheap. I used to live in a home, and just replacing all the windows to be insulated was $30,000 for all the windows in the home. So.
I'm going through that now. I'm replacing doors that have basically rotted out from the rain and now are almost useless. Needs to get done before the rainy season started, but it's an older home. And I agree with you, Gabriella, that it's pricey.
Yeah,
Very pricey.
I rent right now. I rent right now. I went through divorce, so I'm renting right now, and it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
crazy in the house, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
How about anything to do with these bigger loads like heating and cooling? What can we do in heating and cooling?
So there's
Oh.
landscaping concepts that will provide shade on exterior south walls that get hot, things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
Does that tie in, Terry, to land use and the planning of where and how some of these developments take place? Because what I see is when a development is implemented, the land is basically made barren. And then less effective trees are planted in place of the original trees. And somehow that's flying in the face of climate change issues.
Agreed.
So planting deciduous trees if we want shade in the summer and we want the sun exposure in the winter to warm us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
how about sourcing power? Do both utilities provide green power programs or the equivalent?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
I don't know. Nelson, do you guys?
we do. We have an offset program, yes.
The smart energy program?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
But that's like only one time for the homeowner, isn't it?
No, it's for any customer. Any customer of ours can buy into the smart energy program.
Okay.
So how about cooling, since that's going to be coming ever more present? What kind of efficient cooling is there?
I think the mini split systems is what is more energy efficient right now than, and I'm sharing this for my own experience that I just went through. Mini splits are the best option that I could find when I was a homeowner, because replacing the AC system or putting an AC with the previous system in the home was too expensive. And even the permits are really hard to get.
So mini splits, and then if we're talking heat, we've got multiple options for heat.
Can provide the heat too. So the mini split can provide the heat and the cold and the humidifier as well.
Hey, Josh, I think on both the heating and cooling side, we also have to include emerging technologies in the conversation.
Please share.
The state, in this last legislative session, the state authorized construction of thermal energy systems. So either per dwelling or a network system. Both of those are now legal in the state of Washington for energy companies, utilities to help provide. So it's essentially ground source. So thermal energy networks or thermal energy systems, those are now options for both heating and cooling, and those are non-emitting. So those should be included in the conversation as well.
Thank you.
Could we have, at some point, maybe not now, because we probably don't have time, but I would love to get a better explanation of that technology.
Sure.
Nelson.
You bet.
And then I would say we probably have one more thing to add for owner occupants. Where do you think there is an equity concern here?
I think looking at the low income, renters and homeowners, because, for them to implement, well, homeowners, in any of the energy efficient systems. So it needs to be something affordable or some kind of, assistant, assisting program to help them attain those, I don't know.
Right.
Well,
Upgrades,
energy or
basically
what-
upgrades.
Yeah, like some kind of, program, tax break or coupon or whatever, however you want to call it. So, but I think it needs to be considered, not only in the gross income of the family, but also on the, taxes they pay. And I'm saying this because I work with families that are undocumented. They pay a very high tax on their income and they get nothing out of that. So even though their gross income might be higher than the 200 or 300 poverty level, and they don't qualify for those coupons. But if you look at the taxes they pay, they get below that income level to where they could qualify for the incentive. Do you know what I'm saying? And they already pay a higher interest rate than their homes. They pay about, so right now they pay 11% on a mortgage. Imagine paying 11% on a mortgage because they don't have Social Security number, because they buy it with an IT number. And so they put a double the down payment on the home and they pay more than double the, mortgage. So if you look at what they pay and like their taxes, they should qualify for those incentives.
So a different way of assessing ability to pay, right? And what qualifies you for incentives.
Correct.
Okay.
Not only by gross income, but by, I think, case by case.
I also know that with a lot of the older homes, you will see the need for major panel upgrades if you're going to put in, let's say, a heat pump that would be more efficient for cooling and heating. But those panels are often an extra cost that is not covered in those programs. So some money for panel upgrades. And then Nelson, for hot water, what's the kind of highest efficiency gas appliance? Because I know there's heat pump hot water heaters now that are very efficient, but what's the best for gas water heaters?
That would be the tankless water heaters.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Great,
Tankless water
thank you.
Yeah, that's the best one.
Tankless? Is that what
Yeah.
Nelson said?
Yes,
Okay.
tankless, that's correct.
Is that the one that's on demand?
Yes.
Yes.
Sweet.
And it's inline hot water too. So there's always hot water available, which means you don't have to run water to get hot water. You don't have to run your water heater to get, excessively to get the hot water and so forth. So yes, on demand.
So so Nelson, my grandson is a plumber on new construction and, well, he's an apprentice, but he's been told that a lot of the requirements are now to go electric.
That is correct, yeah.
So the state building code has changed that so that it's much more difficult and much more expensive to do tankless water heat.
Okay.
But it's not impossible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Even though it's more efficient.
Like it in color. Okay.
All right, folks online, we're gonna resume. Are you all ready? Okay, All right, well, hopefully you all had some good conversations in your small groups. We're gonna take some time to just do a couple of highlights, report out, and then we'll consolidate all
Email
these
it to the
notes
computer then.
and give the good work, to move forward. So let's go to Noel's group first. I think I heard you.
Monica and I are gonna report out.
Okay, great.
Should I go first? Okay.
Let's talk about education.
Okay, awesome. All right, so in our group, very much we thought education is absolutely essential, especially even reminders, text messages. When you're moving into the apartment, there's like visual aids of like, shut this off, or, close your refrigerator, or just really making sure that people see what needs to be done, and education out on different ways of building, and you continue.
Okay, yeah. So we came up with two things in particular to kind of talking about builders and developers and how we can help, with sort of the affordability and all the things we need to keep things equitable. And one was to, we get codes and policies, you must do this, you must do that, but having somewhat of a program that is a certification for builders that choose to build a certain type of product that is, doing all the things that we need it to do as far as green policies. And so maybe that program is something like a certified green builder under Clark County, that if they're doing so many of these types of buildings, they get some sort of little emblem. The other thing that I think we all agreed on, and it is a huge barrier for our industry, and Monica brought it up about having more apprenticeships so that we can get more people in the workforce helping build these things.
Yeah.
And
Very good.
it's very difficult to have apprenticeships. So if the county has any way to help us break through that barrier, that would be amazing. So we're all on board with apprenticeships and second-hand apprenticeships, bringing people second chance.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good.
But giving people an opportunity who need a second chance to get into the trades and things like that. So we were in violent agreement on those two things.
There's people with colorful
Violent
hats,
agreement.
no licenses, felonies. We need to have all hands on deck, and we need to make sure that the community feels like this is their community. Not just feel like, well, I guess I just have to work at, a $17 an hour job, in order to, and two of them, in order to make rent, and also even asking the county to pay for half of their wages, and then the companies pay the other half, to make sure it's even easier to bring people on board. And so it's just making sure that the education piece and everything, but also brought up was these prices are set by rational economic demand, and so we need to make sure that we're rewilding our Mother Earth so that it's not so expensive in supply, demand, and all the things. All the systems.
It's not rational.
No, thank you. Exactly. Check out Rational Economic
The
Man versus
market is
Humanity
not
rap
rational.
battle on YouTube.
She did say rap battle.
Yes, and it's with puppets. You'll love it. I swear, my kiddos love it. It's great.
All right, well, thank you. All right, maybe I'll go next from our group, and then we'll go to this group over here, and then we'll go to the online group. Okay, so from this group over here, which was Justin, Sharon, Jessica, and Nick, we spent some good time on the builders and developers category, and said that more education to builders and developers on what's possible is helpful rather than a lot more requirements. And folks said that there are actually a lot of things that are already required for new developers to reduce energy in buildings, and it would be helpful to just know what those are, so maybe some public awareness on that, and then also some awareness for the public if a building is going above and beyond what's required, so they can make smart choices in buying. And then on equity issues for builders and developers, it was just noted that, having more energy efficiency things happen in buildings cost more, and so that's passed on to the buyer. So that's an equity issue there. We talked a bit about owner-occupied buildings, and someone brought up that in other places they do these classes to homeowners where they can learn about the different kinds of energy efficient improvements they can put in their homes, and that could be really helpful and something that the county could help support. And even helping homeowners and owner-occupied buildings understand their return on investment for putting in some of these energy-saving ideas, like how long will it take for it to pay for itself, for example. We talked a bit about schools too, and how new schools are so much more efficient, but thinking about, you don't always want to tear something down, so that's a challenge there. And then we talked about little things like lifestyle changes, culture changes that could happen in offices, and even just having more openable windows that open in offices, and a system in place to open them at the right time would probably make a big difference. So some little changes like that. And maybe just lastly, I'll focus on the renters category. People noted that a lot of times renters really want to make positive changes, but they're not allowed to. So is there a way to make that more flexible and a way to incentivize property managers or landlords to put nice things in rentals, so that they're there for the renter, especially in older dwelling units. Someone noted that should really be the focus because those have lower income occupants in general and more energy leakage. Anything else I want to add that?
You were the note taker.
I know. All right, great. All right, let's go over here to Sunrise Philo, Brent's group, and Dave.
You want to say something?
And we did tell you just one or two things, so
Yeah,
you don't have to
I
live
know,
up
I'm
to
sorry.
Sylvia's.
Yeah, I talked fast.
That's what we talked about.
Okay, all right. Well, you can go ahead and I'll add whatever you.
Are you sure? You seem like you want to go for it.
No.
Oh, all right.
I'm not a public speaker.
Okay, well, we focused the majority of our time on renters, and then into property managers and touched on to owner occupants. So, you guys have said some of what we already also said. I think it's just reiterating again, education and outreach, and just getting that information and looking at the different ways and different methods to get that information out. So not just limiting it to one way, but really looking at reaching your demographic where the demographic is. And so on the equity things, equity piece of this, really looking at community groups and reaching out to community groups to do a lot of that outreach. Where Clark County can help with that is also offering incentives or grant writing assistance to be able to help get some of these grants that maybe they wouldn't be able to otherwise. We talked about looking at, a lot of it was education, also incentives, because there are things that even renters can do that, it could be a nest program where do something along those lines where you're able to get that thermostat, the nest thermostat, or, the electricity monitoring, things that renters a lot of times feel and don't have any say over their physical shape and everything, but there are things that they can empower them to make changes. And so, looking at that, I think Dave mentioned, the last thing I'll say on here was, oh no, we weren't going to talk about that one, never mind. That was the leaf blowers.
Oh,
never mind.
about that.
No,
Sunrise,
we weren't supposed
Sunrise.
to.
The personal example.
I know. So one thing, Brett and I had a little discussion, and that was really, but the end result of it was where he said, what is the benefit for a property manager / owner of a building to do any of these incentives or do any changes with greenhouse gas appliances or things like that? And my thing where he kind of paraphrased it is setting the example. And so they can be setting the example, the quote-unquote right example, to have lower greenhouse gas emissions and really set that as a standard within themselves.
We have also, for building developers, is it install vehicle charging plugs in new houses? Is this something?
You just had to get it in, didn't you?
We talked about a green building code.
He gets a charge out of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Having a green building code.
A green building
Solar
code.
panel.
something that, you know, can be used. It's a great building, which is ours.
You're saying advocating, but you said it shouldn't be forced on. I didn't say that. Okay. I think everything should be forced on everybody.
Sorry about that online. I think we have an echo.
It's on the three dots, more.
We're done.
Okay, thank you. That was great. All right, we'll go to the online group for a report out.
Harrison, back me up on this one if I miss some details. But so first for renters, we just want to make loud and clear that both utilities have free energy audits for both renters and owners or property managers. So whether you've got gas systems or electric systems, you can come in and get a free energy efficiency audit, and that'll give you the list of things you can do. We also heard that with renters in particular, there's some challenges when there are health and safety concerns for those, so those buildings aren't meeting the standard energy code, or they have broken windows, or doors without seals, or roofs that leak. And there may be a role for the county, and we're not sure if that's the health department or if there's some kind of renters regulations that protect folks in there. But we also noted that challenge of the property owner doesn't gain from the efficiency, the tenant gains from the efficiency. So if that incentive is there just to help the user save money by getting that equipment, there's got to be something special for property owners to support the folks that are their tenants. And maybe that is more of a public interest and not a private interest. The owner occupants of a house, same opportunities are there, and we talked through a few of the specific interventions, including more efficient appliances, like if you have on-demand water heating for gas, or you've got heat pumps for heating or cooling or for hot water. We also heard that there's often in calculating affordability or the ability to qualify for incentives that a lot of the algorithms don't actually function for real world circumstances. Many folks would be paying a higher interest rate on their mortgage, and total expenses may not be visible, especially for undocumented people. But other categories of folks may not even have financials to share. And then with that, it's basically how can Clark County help? Well, Clark County could get out the word to all building owners, or help spread the word that the two utilities have programs. And also, the county may also want to support some of these transitions for folks that can't afford it. Harrison or our group, any other things that we should add?
I think that pretty much covers it.
Thank
I think
you.
it was good. It was good. Thanks, Josh.
I think we lost some time trying to figure out the breakout room that we were not supposed to be in.
Gabby did. Oh. Did you say you had some trouble figuring out which breakout room to be in?
We lost some time with.
Oh, you lost time.
Going
Okay,
back to
yeah,
online
yes, and apologies for that. Yeah, we're struggling with the technology a little bit. Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for reporting out. It sounds like there were some great conversations. Tracy, next steps on this piece, did you have a?
Yeah, I think those are in the slideshow.
Okay, I'll get it.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, so just the next step, sorry. We will be collecting the sheets, so if you're online, any notes that you filled out in those, documents, we will collect those, and then for anyone in the room, we'll collect those as well. And so we'll just track these comments, and like I mentioned before, we'll plug them in where they're appropriate based on the comment, because as you can hear, the conversation was kind of all over the board, and we got lots of great ideas that we can plug in at different points. So thank you for all of those great ideas. And this will help inform our development and analysis of the potential options for emissions reductions related to building energy for Clark County.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so more to come on that next time, and I think we're now going to move into our next topic, which is diving into the prioritization criteria. So just a reminder, at our last meeting, we started to talk about the prioritization criteria a little bit. You got that in your, you got the criteria in your email. Many of you submitted comments on that, so thank you for that. We also know that there was a little bit of confusion too with some of the prioritization criteria information. So I think Tracy's going to spend a little bit of time walking through the process for the prioritization. And what we really want to do today is just confirm with the CAG that the list of, 7 or 8 criteria are a good list to use when the team analyzes the different goals and policies and actions for greenhouse gas emission reductions and for resilience. So I'll hand it over to Tracy.
Okay. On the next slide, we just have a reminder of what this process is going to look like. So to keep in mind, the prioritization criteria that's in the framework that you all have reviewed in between meetings are essentially categories for additional analysis, and they are aligned with the state priorities, and then our work with you is to confirm that they're aligned with the community priorities. So we are going to, we have, sought your feedback to confirm the prioritization criteria, and then we will, the consultants will analyze the policies and actions based on the framework that we have, once we get to that agreement. And then the results of that are going to be prioritized policies and actions. Those policies and actions that are scored highly will get deeper analysis. So just because something doesn't score highly doesn't mean that it won't make it into the comp plan. It won't be prioritized for additional analysis. And then we will also provide, we will take the prioritized goals, policies, and actions to the EJC for equity analysis using the equity lens that they've created. So for anyone who noted that equity was not one of those criteria, it's because equity will be a part of all of the prioritized action, not a method of prioritizing. So our first pass with you was to confirm the criteria themselves. And then at our next meeting, we want to bring to you bring the criteria back for weighting, which is applying a relative importance or weight to the scores that something gets in that category, so that we can determine which of those criteria are most important in determining the prioritization. Does that make sense? Does everyone understand weighting? I just want to make sure that we...
Didn't we do that in one of those 2 things that we were supposed to respond to?
Not about the weighting. So
Thought we did. I thought that was in there.
That was just to settle on the questions that we asked you, and I'll go through them here. But they were to make sure that the criteria are moving forward. Okay.
And I will say some folks did tell us which ones they think are most important. So that input still, it didn't like disappear, but but that will be sort of the next step, Brent. And I see questions from Sunrise, Justin, and Jessica. So go ahead, Sunrise.
It's kind of just a process question for you. So you're saying that we're going to create this prioritized policies, and then it's going to go to EJC. So is the EJC, right, it's going to go to the, that's the EJC group, right? That's one. So are they going to have the opportunity to also voice their opinions on the prioritization list? Or are they just taking the list that we're giving them and saying, now where do I, like, how much say are they having and how much input are they having into this, I guess? I'm just a little confused, maybe.
Yeah, so we've brought the confirmation of the criteria and the weighting to the CAG, and as CAG's responsibility, and then EJC will be the primary response to the equity lens, equity element. So there's a little bit of a division of labor because the groups are a little bit different.
Yeah. So they also are going to equally be able to look at the prioritization and give their feedback, basically.
They will not, we have not planned to take the same exercise that we did with you to EJC.
So they're going to take our work as a non-equity focused group and then put the equity focused lens on what we've done.
So something that we've seen in a lot of the work that we do is that when you use equity as a prioritization, you're saying, is equity more or less important than something else? So that's one of the reasons why we're taking the equity out of the prioritization. And the equity will be built into each action. Because in the end, also, the resiliency goals and policies, the greenhouse gas emissions reduction actions, they're not inherently equitable or non-equitable, right? It's about how they're implemented. And so that's why the equity lens is important to include on all of them, but not to say, is this piece of equity more important or less important than something else? Because that really puts equity against other priorities rather than saying that it's a priority along with everything.
And I know I see other tents, but you are on the EJC, Monica, so I want to give you a chance to respond if you have input.
Thank you for that, Sunrise. So then, since the equity is not in here in this priority thing, and it goes to the EJC, when the EJC looks at all this and looks at it through an equity lens, then does it come back here and then get picked apart again?
The CAG will have an opportunity to see the EJC's comments.
And say yay or nay?
The CAG ultimately is the group that will make the recommendation for approval, right? Am I correct?
Yes. So this is the group that's voting on the recommendation to move forward to the Planning Commission and Council. The EJC's focus, right, is helping county staff with public engagement to make sure we are getting input from some of our more marginalized community members who we don't typically hear from, right? Making sure that public feedback is being collected, right? Contributing to ideas for policies along the way. And then when there's a draft list that the CAG has debated over, going back to the EJC and EJ saying, okay, now let's look at every single one of these, right? And talk about, is this helping improve equity? Is it not? How could we make this more equitable, right? So it's,
I mean, that answers my question. I think that I will say that I'll reserve the rest of my comments until I learn more about what it is, but I might come back to this again.
And then finishing up, it goes to the EJC and then comes back here.
And then we do the final.
Then do the final, like, oh yeah, that makes sense, or oh,
Yeah.
that doesn't make sense. And so that's a little concerning. But yeah.
Yeah. Monica.
Yeah, that's why I was like, I need to be on both groups.
And others. We have a couple
Yeah.
EJC members who are also on this.
Gabrielle.
Gabby, yep.
All right, Justin?
Yep, so I just had a quick question, Tracy. So when you're talking about weighting these 7 different different criteria. So we're gonna be giving it like a numerical value, like, is that how I should think about it? Okay.
Yes.
Um,
And I didn't want to get too into the weeds on that, and because we'll go over that next time, but please,
okay.
yeah.
And so are we gonna weight these and then have the UJC look at it, or like, how is that, the timing wise?
Yes, you all are waiting, Jenna, you're waiting first, and then the EJC will see how the weighting, what the weighting is and what the, yeah.
And Jessica.
I had a similar question to Justin. I was just wondering if we were going to weight them each one individually, like effectiveness would get a weight and then time frame would get a weight that way, or are we going to like combine them together so that like you would have effectiveness plus time frame plus cost, like, and divide that by feasibility, and then come up with a value that way?
So we'll assign them a percentage value. So if it's 100%, then we'll assign 20% to cost and 10% to feasibility, or however the group decides, right? So so then each action or policy will get scored for on each criteria. So a 1, 2, or a 3.
Individually though, but not like combining them together to get a single value.
Correct. So each criterion will get a score for each action or policy. So a 1, 2, or 3, for example, and then we'll multiply that by the weight. So if it's 10% of the score, then that 3 would get a 10 times 10%, and then we'll add them all up in the end, and that will give us a numerical weighting.
Okay, so, but again, it's only like single criterion at a time, so like effectiveness, right? So it'd have an effectiveness score, right, and then it'll have like a time frame score, instead of just giving it one score, like increment.
There will be a total at the end.
Okay.
But each one will get an individual score.
So based on each criterion?
That's correct.
Okay, so we'll have multiple scores for each.
That's correct.
Okay.
I also want to note that the conversation on weighting is happening at a future meeting, so I know that you might not have been prepared to speak to all the ins and outs of how the weighting is going to work today, but, Sunrise?
So I had sent a message, and I'm more than happy to also just ask outside of this meeting, but, the prioritization criteria that you guys sent out, there was the table that you had. Is this something that we should be, you're asking the criteria list, which was one of the columns, but there was the resilience and then the greenhouse gas emission, I think it was, those. That really threw me in looking at that. I mean, I talked to Sylvia about it, trying to figure out what that point was. So are you asking us to, and maybe you'll say it, but I don't see it in the slides, so are you asking us to kind of, again, voice, yes, these 7 things that we have on here, and ignore the resilience? Because to me, what's effective to me might be very different than what's effective to Brent or Nick or Monica or whatever, So is that a later conversation as to what is effectiveness in how that's being
applied to all?
So, let me go through the next couple slides, and we'll see if we still have questions there. Is that okay?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, great. Sometimes it's difficult to tell, do you break for questions in the middle and then kind of see what comes up, or do you wait till the end?
And I didn't see anything on that, so that's why I thought, do I ask later or do I ask now? So, okay.
Okay, so here we have the list of the recommended criteria. So this is the highest level with the least amount of detail, right? So there is more detail beneath this that you saw. Just to remind you what these are, and also to mention that that equity is not listed as one of them because we will evaluate equity considerations for each action and policy once they're prioritized. So moving on to the next slide, we asked you 2 questions. The first question was, do you feel that these criteria are easy to understand and reflect the local context for Clark County's climate element project? If not, what changes would you suggest? And there were some clarifying questions, some questions about who it's understandable to. And so we had meant for this to be understandable to you. We will write things out in more detail for people who haven't been following along in this process. And so overall, we received comments that, that yes, it was understandable that these criteria were defined in an understandable way. With some small clarifications, which we noted, and none of them change any approach, but there are additional clarifications that we will note and continue to move forward as we're working with the framework into the future. We did definitely note that in balancing the needs of putting information into a consolidated space, that spelling out acronyms is really helpful, so we'll make sure to do that. Some more, and please, if we miss any more, please let us know. I think sometimes we talk a lot about acronyms in the meetings, and then in between, it can be easy to forget that we need to respell them out again. So thank you for pointing that out to us.
What does CAG stand for?
And then a lot of the comments that we received were providing particular emphasis on elements that are included in the evaluation criteria that we saw. So I didn't call any of them out specifically because they were, you know, people saying, I think this is really important, and we will note that. But nothing really to discuss there because it was included in the criteria. And then there are some additional comments that were a little bit outside of this particular question, and so we will just add those to the comment tracker and plug them in for feedback where they're appropriate. So Sharon, for example, you had some recommendations that we are not within scope to include, but we will note that they are a desire of community to be reviewing. So that's one example there. So overall, to our first question, if the criteria themselves are easy to understand and reflect the local context, we heard from this group that yes, they are. And then the second question was that state guidance requires inclusion of some criteria, which were effectiveness, time frame, co-benefits, and equity. And then there were some additional recommended criteria in the framework: cost, unintended impacts, feasibility, and authority. And we asked you if there were any that don't seem relevant that we should exclude. And we did get a comment that that co-benefits are there, but they're not the core purpose of this project. And so we heard that, but it's one of the required criteria to use it to evaluate, so it will remain. And so we just wanted to note that we heard that comment. And then some of the suggestions that people made were with the feasibility criteria to be really clear on what reasonable means in our analysis. There's the greenhouse gas emissions reduction feasibility analysis is if it's reasonably technically feasible, and so a definition of what that reasonable means. Some ideas for elements to include in cost of inaction, and those that is related to resilience, and so those are noted, and we will be including those. And then for cost, a desire to phrase positively where possible, so a lot of things can result in cost savings, and so phrasing that as a benefit rather than just an outright cost. And then a couple people mentioned adding funding as a criterion, and as a consultant team we discussed this, and funding is very important, and it is more important later on in the process than for the comprehensive planning process. So at this point of the county's process, stating what the important priorities are for the county is the goal, and then in the future, when it comes time to implement those, that's when seeking funding will be most important. So, so this is something that we will note in the in the summary, but we won't be able to include that as a criterion. And then we also had some of the same kind of emphasis on points that we found that were already included in the framework, and then a couple of comments that were also recommendations that we'll note for where they fit into the process, but weren't necessarily related to the framework.
Yeah, do you have a question, Monica?
I just wanted to possibly add this wherever it fits. Equity for our Mother Earth encompasses the idea of fairness and justice in how we treat the planet and its resources. It emphasizes the need for sustainable practices that ensure all living beings can thrive. This concept advocates for responsible stewardship of the environment, addressing issues like climate change, pollution, and resource depletion, while considering the rights and needs of marginalized communities. It calls for collective action to create a balance between human development and ecological preservation. And I'm not sure if that's like equity for our Environmental Justice Coalition, that's something for like Mother Earth. So that could be included.
I think if we break that down, but I'm just hearing that for the first time, but I think if we break that down, you'll find that many of the elements are included in other parts of the framework, and so I would, again, upon first hearing, just consider that much of that is probably incorporated in the framework.
And I'll send it.
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome, thank you.
And do you have any more slides here?
Just the next step.
Okay. Gabriella, I think I had a question here from Gabriella, if you want to go ahead.
Yes, thank you. It's not a question. I just wanted to mention that in some of the conversation we had with our team on Zoom is that for businesses, they usually rent their space. And what I see the most, and I'm talking about the 4-plane corridor, I'm glad that the criteria of equity is going to be throughout the program. So it's not going to be just one thing. So what I was sharing with our group is that the landlords for commercial spaces usually leave the work to be done for the renter, and they don't absorb any of the cost, even though they are taking the rent, but they don't do the updates. So just to let you know, so maybe the county can do something about that to ensure that it is the landlord that makes those expenses, not the renter. Because they usually say, and when I'm saying they, it's usually one renter, one landlord that is the owner of most of the commercial spaces in the 4-plane corridor. Well, if you don't like it, you can move out. But the landlord usually doesn't do any of the updates or fixing anything. It's everything up to the renter of the business, just to let you know. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabriella. Okay, I think we have one more slide on the prioritization criteria, and then we just want to check with the group that the list of criteria is okay to move forward. So just on next steps.
So with the next steps, the prioritization will happen the framework will work in a 2-step process. So the first pass for scoring prioritization will be that first column that you saw in both resilience and GHG emissions. And so the consultants will score those policies and actions according to the defined elements in those columns. And then we are also currently working to collect information to develop the list of potential greenhouse gas emissions reduction actions, including our conversation today and our conversation that we plan to have at future meetings. Then once we have the prioritized actions, that the consulting team will also evaluate the emissions reduction actions using the framework. So the work is going to start right away with the resilience goals because you all have, those all have passed through this group. So our September CAG meeting will determine the criteria weighting. So that's that math that we talked about. And we'll go into a lot more detail about what that looks like prior to the meeting. And that just determines how important each criterion is relative to the other ones. And then in the October meeting, we will bring to you the prioritization scores for resilience goals and policies and greenhouse gas emission reduction actions so that you can see how things have sifted out based on the criteria that is in this framework.
So let's do a few questions and then we'll see kind of confirming the criteria. Go ahead, Jessica. And I also heard it's a little bit hard to hear, so be sure to speak up and use that microphone that's right in front of you. Yeah.
I was just wondering, we didn't finish the resilience goals. Like we went through part of them and then we ran out of time. So are we going to revisit those before we evaluate them with the criterion?
This is Jenna. So no. So we are working off of the draft list in the state that it got to. The idea and how we had that discussion was to talk about the biggest issues first. We know that there's probably still lots of feedback on like how things are worded, or if something.
Yeah, I just know that we like stopped and it's like, oh, we're going to come back and visit it after the greenhouse gas and finish the list.
Yeah, so it'll come back, but we're gonna time is one of our biggest challenges for this project. So Dana's team is gonna start using the prioritization framework to start analyzing those further. But we will come back. You will see the list, and there'll be more opportunities to say, you know, one, should things even be on the list still or not, right? And then also further revision, because this analysis is going to hopefully it'll bring more information to you all too to consider, right? Like, so anyway, so we'll come back. There will be more opportunities to look at and deliberate, but it's still going to be a few months until that happens.
Yeah, and you might remember, I think that all of the resilience goals and policies, except for a few, ended up going forward for analysis. Kind of the ones that we didn't talk about, they're still going forward for analysis, or pretty much all of them, with a few caveats. Dawn, go ahead.
So we've been talking about the prioritization criteria. When are we going to get to the key considerations that we were asked to think about for tonight? Like in my notes, it was called the key considerations for greenhouse gas emissions reductions in buildings. There were specifics.
That was the activity that we just did.
Didn't know that. Like, the state has done all this work for us, where we're reinventing the wheel, and we haven't even included any of those things.
So because we don't want to reinvent the wheel, we're looking through all of those, and we're using your comments to identify which ones we're hearing from you are most relevant to Clark County.
Thank you.
And also based on the emission sources.
Thank you.
So if we go to the next slide, we do have just kind of one question for the group, which is, do you generally support the list of criteria for use in the prioritization activity moving forward? So I'll just check with the group. Does it sound okay to use that list of criteria? We could go back to that slide, just like 3 back, just have it up on the screen. Yeah.
Well, you can't go wrong with generally.
It'll be general, and then they'll come back with what we say.
Can you live with it? Maybe I'll say it that way.
I can't. The question is.
I can live with it. Elephant in the room, yes, I can live with it.
All right, that settles it. Nick and I, that settles it.
That's all you need.
We need more than Brett and Nick, but appreciate that. Anyone else have concerns with moving this list of recommended criteria forward?
I'm not happy because, as far as I know, none of the key considerations that I submitted yesterday came up today. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that, going through this document, and I also reached out to a number of public affairs Facebook pages, asking them for input, and none of that got included in here on the key considerations. Like, one that's here not as a key consideration, which I thought maybe should be a key consideration, was that publicly owned facilities should be prioritized for doing things first, like schools and county and city building. But maybe you haven't had a chance to evaluate what I submitted, but I don't think we got into the nitty-gritty at all yet.
So you would have expected a fuller conversation on that. And it is coming back, yes, like the list of actions. You haven't seen the list of actions that the team has developed, which will come back for more discussion.
That's what I was missing.
And it takes us time to digest the information that you send and prepare information for this meeting too. So if you sent it yesterday, it's unlikely that it would be ready for presentation here. But our plan is to collect all of the comments and feedback that you're presenting and map where they're being applied in the process, because we're receiving a lot of comments that are related to ideas for actions or ideas for how actions should be carried out, or equity considerations. And so our plan is to map how they're being incorporated into the process and show that to you so that you can see that you're being listened to.
Thank you. For the rest of CAG, you can look on the CAG comments page, go way down to the bottom, you can find out what I said yesterday. And it takes a while for us to prepare them.
Yeah.
And I didn't exactly know what you were asking until Saturday. And so it took me a while too. Now maybe you told us questions ahead of time and I just was slow to get at them. But so yeah, I encourage people to review those.
Okay, thank you, Don. And you went above and beyond on that piece, because there was no specific homework for the buildings and energy, but appreciate you bringing in those comments in advance.
Thank you.
Okay, Sunrise.
So I guess my take on the criteria, if I were to, because I'm bringing open, the thing you guys sent out, the basic just criteria, generally, I'm okay with. However, I'm having trust issues. And I'm having a little bit of concern about and maybe it's just not understanding this entirely, and the resilience, and feeling like we've done a lot of information, we've done a lot. You mentioned we didn't finish resilience. I'm like, I don't remember going through this, so, there's just a lot that we've done. So, but I guess, just to clarify, just so I kind of maybe understand maybe one thing, just picking one of these, so where it says effectiveness, and there's two things on there. Is that solely what each of these if it's effective, it's gonna be based off of just those two things?
Can you tell me what the
number of minimum policy requirements addressed and number of climate hazards addressed?
That is how resilience policies will be scored to be prioritized.
Okay.
And the policy requirements addressed are based on the policy requirements set by the state.
Okay.
And then the climate hazards are the hazards that we've been discussing.
Because normally, kind of touching risk of this at what Nick was saying with the data, I feel a bit, data just goes over my head. This is the stuff I can kind of understand a little bit more, but I do feel like it's lacking information, and I feel like, I'll vote to go with the general on this, but I do feel like
So if you want to know a little bit more about how these criteria are going to be applied to
I guess I feel like we keep being told, don't worry, you guys, later. It's going to come later. We're going to go into more detail later. We're going to go into more detail later. And I'm feeling like when yet we're asked to vote on things each as we go, and so I'm just a little bit confused. And I feel like I'm gonna turn around and wake up 7 months from now and be like, when did we do that? Oh, we did that. We did it, staff did it. And so, anyways, it's just being asked to vote on something, and I'm not fully sure I understand it, but, and I don't feel like it got answered, so I do think that having more of a one-on-one makes sense to me.
Sylvia, can I
Yeah,
chime in
yeah.
on that? I will say, the voting on these criteria today is you'll come back, you'll see the results of the analysis, right? And you all will help give us the weighting for the criteria, but we won't be able to go back and redo analysis. So the confirmation on the framework is to give the consultants
The chance to do it.
they're gonna move ahead and we won't have the ability to go back and analyze again. So that's the confirmation we're seeking today so that we can get the consultants going. So I do think it's right. If you have concerns about the framework, talk about them now because you're gonna see the results. Anyway, that's coming up. So this is not, you'll see the results come back to you, but we won't be able to revisit the framework. So I do think this is I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, and I mean, I know time got derailed, it usually does in this group, so I know we didn't have maybe as much time as we would have to talk about it, but it seems like it's kind of a big topic, but now we just don't have the time.
We got 7 minutes left.
Yeah, no, we don't. Other people need to, anyways, again, I'll move forward with the group with it. It's just a little bit, again, it's just my trust issues with advisory committees, I guess. Issues that, right. And.
I wanted to clarify.
Well, I think maybe Monica was first, so
Yes.
Monica, Dawn, and then Nick. Sorry if I get the order wrong.
I just always want to make sure that Mother Earth is at the table, because the essence of being human is that we are all interconnected and interdependent within the web of life. And so believing that we have a right to dominate will not make progress. And so we have to have a different relationship with our water, our soil, our land, our mindsets, shifting our mindsets. And so I'm like, where is that in this list of making sure that she's at the table all the time?
And Dawn?
My clarification is, I was concerned that what I thought we were supposed to do is come up with implementation policies that will get us to emissions reduction, high priorities versus low priorities, like the state recommended carpool lanes as a suggestion. But that may not work, that might work in Seattle, but maybe not down here. And so those are the implementation types of things, and they had like 200 suggestions. When are we gonna have the implementation priority? I'm focused on what should be prioritized for implementing. And so that's clarifying, just to let you know where my head was coming from. And then the second, what Monica says in here, something that says basically what you said, only it's called rights of nature.
Mm-hmm.
That means somebody can sue.
There we go.
Do trees have standing? Like, do you have standing in court to be, that somebody could represent you and that you actually have standing?
I completely agree. That's what I've been hearing a lot in my circles, are rights of nature. Because whatever we do to our Mother Earth, we're doing to ourselves. So thank you, Dawn, so much.
And Nick?
Major concerns here. I keep hearing the state mandates, and this is Clark County. Again, if we're taking money from them and we have to abide by them, I don't think that should be our core focus on. We should have Clark County set these rules, not state mandates.
These are suggestions.
Okay, but she's been talking about the state, and so I kind of want to know, do we have a pathway we're going down that the state is going to tell us what to do? Because we took funding from them.
And I'll keep reiterating, the goal of this CAG is to develop goals and policies for climate resilience and greenhouse gas reduction that work for unincorporated Clark County. And this is coming from the state mandate, but that's the role of this group, to figure out what works for unincorporated Clark County.
But then again, this exercise we went through tonight, I don't think any of us knew here that this was setting goals on climate stuff. This was not explained to us at all, that that's what we're doing. We thought we were just doing an exercise, and I think, I hate to say it, but the last hour and a half that we did it is a waste of time for us.
Maybe not for everybody, Nick.
Okay, who feels that that was explained well to them, and that we got our point across that you wanted to?
That's a different question.
Okay.
Two different, yeah.
I agree with Nick. I don't think that exercise, I didn't know I was studying, like we did with the resilience. I didn't know that that's who we were focusing.
And
That
I guess-
exercise to me wasn't focusing on the same information that was related here, like come up with some goals to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the building sector.
And I guess it wasn't, the exercise wasn't meant to develop the goals. Do you want to say a little bit more about how the
Yeah.
feedback will be used?
So for a couple meetings now, I've been trying to set the stage that our process will be a little bit different than for the resilience process. Resilience is really about how people experience climate change. And so the way that we deal with, that we create resilience really comes from a personal experience. When we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions reductions, the reductions need to be tied clearly and scientifically to the emission sources. So that's where we have gone through the greenhouse gas inventory to show you where the emission sources are in Clark County. And we've talked about, particularly in the buildings and energy sector, where the main sources of emissions are in the buildings and energy sector, and the proven solutions that we have identified that are common across these menu of measures and work that people are doing independently across the country to address the emission sources. And then our goal with the exercise was to get you to talk about those proven sources, ways to reduce emissions, and talk about what people need to know in order to be able to implement them and access them. So that was the thinking and the way that we have been striving to bring you along in this conversation. And what I'm hearing today is that we need to do this in different ways, because it sounds like that has not come across over the couple meetings that we have.
But you said, when Don asked you a question about how these goals are getting in there, you told us, well, that's what you did tonight.
He asked, what about the feedback for key considerations? So this was an exercise to think about key considerations for implementing emissions reduction actions in the buildings and energy sector.
I will disagree with that, but that's.
Well, it sounds like maybe the activity didn't quite meet the mark for expectations, and we'll definitely use the feedback to try to improve for future conversations on the different sectors for greenhouse gas emissions. All right. I'm just gonna take a breath. I know this is hard. And we do have only a couple of minutes. I wanted to see if the member of the public that's here, if you wanted to make a comment during public comment. Are they able to unmute themselves? Okay. Can you raise your hand if you were planning to make a comment? All right, I don't see a hand raised. So I think we can skip that and just move directly into our next steps for the process.
Did you need to vote on?
Right, so there's side, get started on.
Sure, sorry, yeah. Yeah, let's try to vote. So is the list of criteria for prioritization, are you okay with that being the list to use for the prioritization moving forward? I'll just thumbs up. No. Is that a thumbs up?
Yeah,
Right? Okay. And online, maybe I'll just see if anyone has any concerns. I can't, I was having a little bit of trouble tracking. Did anyone say no in this room?
Mine was rights of nature. I wish that was included in there, so. But otherwise, generally. Generally.
Okay.
I would not, so I would like to have a further conversation about that.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Andrea? It got cut up just a little bit.
Yeah, no worries. I said I would not be in favor of that, so I would like to have a more in-depth conversation if that's on the table.
About the rights of nature criteria?
Yes, sorry.
Quick point of clarification. When Don brought that up, he mentioned that it was a potential measure, which would not be part of the evaluation criteria. It would be an action that we would include in the, that would be prioritized. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so the question now, Andrea, is not whether rights of nature should be included in the prioritization criteria. It's a recommendation for an action that would go through the framework.
Okay, got it.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I saw Anne earlier said she was good with the with the criteria. Anyone else online have concerns with the list of criteria? Okay. Sounds good. So we'll move forward with that list of criteria, and the rights of nature maybe we discuss at a future meeting. Oh, yes, go ahead, Jessica.
I was just trying to think what I had commented on, and one of the comments I had made, when you sent that out, was instead of using feasibility, to use effort instead, because some things are easy to do and some things are hard to do, but they could have big benefits. So when you think about it, instead of how easy is it to do, how much effort does it take to do?
Maybe that could be a clarification for how that's kind of worded.
When are you going to, you said you would give us clarification on these before the next meeting. When would that be? Like the day before or tomorrow?
Clarification on the criteria? Oh.
Yeah, I mean, so if we're thinking about prioritizing these or weighting them, what are we basing? I mean, what's, Sunrise mentioned 2 things on effectiveness. Well, I'm sure there are subframes on all of these that would figure into our weighting. So where do we find them? Because I want to think about these, because generally speaking, I'm kind of excited about weighting things.
So our plan for the process is that the consultants will do the analysis. So the consultants will take this criteria, analyze it, provide a score. When we say that you're going to do the weighting, you're going to tell us how important is feasibility relative to authority.
I understand, but what are they basing their weighting on? I mean, they're analyzing this. What are they using to analyze this, and why couldn't we do the same thing?
We can provide a more detailed description of the analysis that will go into each category, if that's helpful.
It is.
But
when?
In advance of the next meeting, for sure.
So more description on the analysis will come before the next meeting on kind of how the criteria would be applied. Is that what that means?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm very interested in weighting these intelligently, but what's my basis for weighting them? Just
fair, right. You
my
need
own
to know more than
opinion?
the
I
word.
mean, I'm not sure everybody wants that.
Correct, I just to clarify this is Jenna. We've been trying to get things out a week ahead of time. Is that a reasonable amount of time? I just want to check, because that's my assumption that we've been trying to meet, since we were struggling with that earlier.
I think I can live with a week in advance.
Generally?
Generally speaking, yeah.
never gonna live that down.
Give or take a couple of weeks.
All right, I know we are over time, and I want to respect everyone's time for, the 8:34. We had a couple of slides on next steps. Do you still want to go over those?
I think we need to regroup on a couple of them.
Okay, then we'll send out an email maybe with any critical next steps that we need to know about. And did you have a quick question?
I just wanted to say thank you so much for all the work that you all are doing. This is a big, humongous, complicated task for you all to take on, and all of us as well. And I just want to give you all a hug. This is so much, and physically and emotionally draining, and I just thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
I second that.
Monica, generally speaking, you're welcome.
All right, well, with that, we will send an email with some follow-up stuff from today if we forgot anything major in the next steps that we weren't able to get to. And thank you all for your great work and the hard conversation today. And we'll keep going, and we'll see you in September.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you. Take care.
What, are we going to talk about?